This episode mentions eugenics. Please watch and listen with care. The Disabled Crone, a Spoonie Authors Network podcast hosted by Cat Gordon. Special guest, Adelle Purdham, entering into and learning from disabled spaces. Hi, I'm Cat Gordon, author, editor, and cupcake eater, and welcome to the Disabled Crone. Our topic today will be entering into and learning from disabled spaces. And with me to discuss this is the absolutely amazing Adelle Purdham. Adelle Purdham, she, her, is an educator, parent disability ally, and best-selling author of the memoir in essays, I Don't Do Disability, and Other Lies I've Told Myself. It was named an Indigo and 49th Shelf Most Anticipated Memoir and Biography and a 2024 Nonfiction Book of the Year by the Miramichi Reader. She holds an MFA in Creative Nonfiction from the University of King's College. Her prose and poetry appear in literary journals, anthologies, magazines, newspapers, and online. Adelle is sessional part-time faculty at Trent University, where she teaches creative writing. She lives and writes in her hometown, Nogajiwanong, Peterborough, Ontario. Welcome, Adelle!
Thank you so much for the lovely introduction, and thank you for having me.
Oh, it's a great pleasure. And you know, what's so cool about this is that we are now in a disabled space because the Spoonie Authors Network is for folks who are disabled, deaf, blind, neurodivergent, managing all kinds of chronic illnesses and other ways that were just awesome. So welcome here to the Spoonie Authors Network.
Thank you for having me.
So, okay, I'm really obsessed with titles. I mean, I love writing titles. I love thinking about other people's titles. And when I saw the title of your book, I immediately thought it was about internalized ableism. Can you share with us, though, why you chose that title and briefly what your book is about?
Absolutely. I love that that's what you got from the title. It's so interesting to me. Readers come with their own background, knowledge, experiences. And I just heard from a reader the other day who said to me, you know, the title was long, you know, it's got the word disability in it. And some folks are afraid, right, of things they don't necessarily understand or have a lot of information about. And so she said, I put off reading it. So it's interesting, like it pushed her away. But then she said, finally, it was the book club book. So she picked it up, she read it, she said she loved it, she bought her own copy and then anyway, had me sign it. But then another reader who had come to a launch event I was hosting, who was in a wheelchair, she said to me, you know, she was the first one to kind of put her hand up at the question and answer period at the end.
Yeah.
And said, thank you so much for putting that word disability on the front of your book, because it's almost an invitation or a challenge to folks who maybe don't know that much about disability or that word, or, you know, internalize ableism. And it's, you know, it's sort of a challenge to learn something. So let me tell you the story now of where the title comes from.
Okay.
It's all about my own internalized ableism. So I'm a mother to 3 daughters, and my middle daughter, Elise, has Down syndrome. And but before I ever had children, when I was about 16 years old, just to give some context, picture a type A competitive gymnast, super driven, but who also, I used to love to do a lot of different volunteer work. And so I believe it was on a day I was coming back. My mom was an elementary school secretary, and I would walk from my high school at lunchtime to her school to teach the kids gymnastics. Then I would come back. And I remember standing outside my high school on the pavement and just sitting with my own thoughts and thinking, you're doing all this volunteer work.
Yeah.
But why are you not volunteering with people with intellectual disabilities?
Mm-hmm.
And I called myself out. And at the time, if I think back to that person, it was clear to me that I viewed disability as, you know, a separate construct versus being part of the human experience, right? And
Yeah.
so I had this idea that if I kept myself and those that I loved separate from disability, somehow that it wouldn't impact me or my life.
Right.
So, I had this thought, um, why am I not volunteering? And I very quickly came to my own rescue and said, that's okay. I just don't do disability.
Mm.
Effectively dismissing, 20 to 25% of the world's population.
Yeah, I was going to say,
And
we're like a quarter of the population.
yeah. So I had that moment. I remember that. And so this idea of, and I mean, that phrasing was popular at the time, probably in the 90s. It
Yeah,
was like, I don't do this. Or so
that's
I was like,
right.
I just don't do disability. And so that's partly where the title comes from. And and then, fast forward to I am 28 years old and I give birth to a daughter with Down syndrome. And
Hmm.
now these narratives that I held on to about disability, they could no longer hold. This idea that as well that disability is a good thing or a bad thing, and I clearly had viewed disability as a negative.
Yeah,
When
yeah,
I came across that word ableism, I was I had to sit with it for a while. This belief that an able body is better is how I think of ableism. And I was like, oh, I do think that. And I can't think that way anymore
yeah.
because I don't feel that way anymore now that I have my daughter in my life. Right? It was a doorway for me to see things much differently. So anyway, that's where the title comes from.
I
It's
do.
almost, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, no, it's all good. It's funny because I'm Generation X, and I also remember the I don't do this, I don't do that. So that made me smile. Oh yeah, I mean, ableism is such a rich tapestry. We could do a whole season on all the different flavors of ableism. Um, but what I did appreciate was how honest you were about it. You weren't making excuses about yourself. You're saying, okay, you know what? This is me. This is how I thought, and now this is the journey of me thinking in a completely different way. And just to let you know, I am a disabled person and I had to fight my own internalized ableism as well. It's really hard to not be affected by ableism when it's taught to us all through society and in medical narratives, right? So
Mm-hmm.
anybody could be wrestling with internalized ableism for sure. Um,
That's
so
very kind of you to say.
no,
Thank you.
but you know what? It's true. It's true. Boy, I can introduce you to a whole bunch of disabled folks who will tell you stories about our own journeys away from ableism. And I think sometimes it's a constant thing with us too. We have to keep
Oh,
working
it's an
through it.
ongoing journey, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the funny thing is, this disabled crone is something that I've been wanting to do, but have been sort of like, oh, I don't know if I should do it or not. And then I met you at Derek Newman Still's book club, and it came up the topic, hey, you should interview Adelle. And I'm like, well, yeah, sure, if you want to, no pressure. And you're like, I'm in. And I thought, okay, well, I guess I'm doing the disabled crone now. um,
These stories are important. I
yeah,
can't think of anything more important than, or anything that's more impactful than sharing our stories,
yeah, for
right? So
sure.
thank you for doing it.
Oh no, you're welcome. And I have to now talk about the moment you won me at the book club. And it's when you talked about your personal saviorism story when you attended what it was, a World Down Syndrome conference. Would you please share that with us? Because I think it's really important for people to hear this story of yours.
Absolutely. So in 2014, when Elise was, oh, she was born in 2012, so she was around two. I went off on, my first trip off on my own, and I was going to go to the World Down Syndrome Congress, which happens every 3 or 4 years, sort of the big international Down Syndrome Congress,
Mm.
where experts from around the world come. And I didn't really realize it at the time because it was my first one, but experts who are physicians, and you have experts who are those who are we call self advocates in the Down syndrome community, those with lived experience,
Yeah.
right? And I didn't really have a sense of what the role of those individuals was going to be. I really hadn't had a ton of exposure to many different people with Down syndrome at that point.
Yeah.
And so I go, it was in India. So I travel to India and I'm waiting to go into my next session. And a fellow mom to an older daughter with Down syndrome says, "You've got a baby with Down syndrome? Okay, you need to come into this room." And I guess the part I need to say is that in my head, I had this idea that I was going to the Congress to collect all this information and bring it back to the families in Canada. And, I was going to save every last one of those babies with Down syndrome, right?
Right. Yes.
It was going to be me. I was going to have all the answers. And, and even when my daughter was born, I don't know if I mentioned this as well, or sorry, when I was pregnant with Elise, my daughter with Down syndrome, I remember we had gone away for a wedding and we were in Barbados. And
Mm,
if I found out the day before we left for Barbados that our baby was going to be born with Down syndrome with certainty.
right.
And so I was feeling, there was a lot of emotions. There was grief. There was actually every emotion imaginable, really.
Yeah.
And picturing what that would mean for her and our family. But yeah, what was I saying about that? That I remember, oh, yes, like talking about every emotion possible. So on that beach, the way I was processing my emotions was to write in a journal. And even in that journal, maybe because I was a classroom teacher, this savior mentality of maybe I'll open a special school for children with Down syndrome, which now I'm like, no, inclusivity. Like, why was I thinking that way? But wanting to, I think people come at things with good intentions, but then when we talk to people with learned experience and we learn what their needs actually are,
Yes.
um, that's helpful. So anyway, back to the conference. I'm in the room. Um, Sherry Bernard's mother says to me, Suzette, she says, "You need to go in and hear my daughter speak." And so Sherry Bernard was the first woman with Down syndrome to become a qualified teacher in South Africa, pardon me.
Right.
And for that honor, for that accomplishment, she was named South Africa's Woman of the Year
Right.
for, of every woman in the country. And so I go in to listen to her speak. And she shared a really poignant story about losing her father that
Hmm.
was very emotional and impactful to everybody in the room. And, there's this perception that if you have Down syndrome, that you're always happy,
Right.
or these are the stereotypes. And it's so not true. Everybody experiences the range of human emotions, right?
Hmm.
So that right away was moving to me. And she spoke beautifully and eloquently. And whether someone helped her with her speech or not, I don't care. She delivered it like fiercely and
Yeah.
beautifully. And so then she's continuing to tell about her life. She's making us laugh. She's telling us about the boys who made fun of her because she had Down syndrome. And so she would threaten to give them her Down syndrome and that shut them up. Like, I love that, right? She had sass. And then she said, "People like me are aborted.
Yes. Yep.
We deserve to live."
Hmm.
And every hair on my arm went up. And I will, till the day I die, I will never forget her saying those words and the impact that had on me. And I left that session knowing that Sherry Bernard had more to teach me in that moment than I ever had to teach her or anyone else. And
Yeah.
it was such a profound moment for me because I didn't know that a person with Down syndrome, someone with intellectual disability or developmental delays could speak up for themselves.
Yeah.
And
And,
yeah,
I mean, I, you know, it's so easy for someone like myself to say, well, of course they can. But you know what? If that information is hidden from you, how would you know? And I think that's the thing that a lot of self-advocacy groups now are starting to really push themselves as far as they can into the spotlight, because our stories are being kept hidden. I'm an autistic woman, Gen X, as I said. So when I was young, there was no autism diagnosis for me. So I had to sink or swim through this life. And now that I'm in community with other folks who are autistic, oh my gosh, it's just, I feel like I found my own country, with people who speak
Mm.
the language I understand. And there's diversity within my own country as well. We're not a monolith, right? But yeah, like, of course, you didn't know that someone with Down syndrome could speak like that, because that was kept hidden, right? There were other narratives put
Mhm.
in front of you. So I really appreciate not only that you shared that story, but that you took the moment to learn from that experience, because not everybody learns. And this, I want to get to kind of my next question here. As an autistic person, I have sadly witnessed too many ally moms or warrior moms try to speak over us autistic voices. I don't know if their intentions, again, are like the best intentions. They want to fight, they care about their child, but what ends up happening is sadly, too frequently, when autistic adults start talking and saying, you know, by the way, this language you're using is hurting us, and this mentality is hurting us, often we get spoken over. And you call yourself a parent ally, and I want to know, for you, what does that mean?
Mm. First and foremost, it means listening to people with lived experience.
Yeah.
I think anyone who's going to be an ally, that's just been the most valuable learning to me. Every conference I've gone to, I always make a point of going to sessions that are and run by people with Down syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I guess for me, it's sharing what I've learned, but my experience as a
Yeah.
mother. It isn't it isn't about telling Elise, my daughter with Down syndrome's story,
Yes.
right? It's been about sharing my journey and hoping that that will, like, come walk a day with me in my shoes to kind of promote understanding
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
empathy, right? For people to just understand, like, it just comes back to this fear of the unknown. And so, as an ally, I am somebody who speaks disability in a way, right? Like, I've put effort into learning about disability and ableism, and I continue to learn. So I
Yeah.
guess it's also a commitment. It doesn't have to be big. It doesn't have to be big. I think people, if you say, I want you to do this big thing, people are going to turn away from it.
Yeah.
But maybe being an ally means, okay, not shameless promotion, but reading my book, right? Reading the story of someone who has autism, right? Or is autistic. Um, Maybe it's reading a book. I think it's being able to imagine a different future as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
One where people are more, just a more inclusive society, just being open-minded to change, and to not being afraid to say something.
Yeah, yeah. No, for sure. And I could also say that, look to fiction stories written by disabled folks. And now it sounds like I'm shamelessly promoting, but I have this curiosity, and curiosity did not kill this cat. But I had a curiosity. I wanted to know how would disabled folks write genre fiction?
Mm.
And I just kind of thought out loud in my blurty way. And next thing you know, myself and my best friend had Nothing Without Us and Nothing Without Us, two disability fiction anthologies out there. And the way the disabled protagonists are portrayed, written by disabled authors,
Mm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
I also believe in the power of fiction to influence. So yeah, read
Mm-hmm.
nonfiction, read fiction, see how
Mm-hmm.
we can be the heroes in nonfiction and fiction. What I wanted to ask you though, I'm wondering if you have sort of a like kind of a well-rounded journey in the sense that you have lived experience as a parent of someone with
Hmm.
Down syndrome. That's a lived experience that's important to share with other parents. And you also
Hmm.
now are listening to lived experience of adults and maybe even younger folks with Down syndrome. So do you find that you're on this journey to this kind of wholeness of allyship?
I feel like once I had my daughter in my life, it wasn't just people with Down syndrome that I started looking at differently.
Yeah.
I feel like the being in the role that I'm in, where sometimes as a parent, it almost hurts you more. Okay, I can't say that because I haven't had that experience of having Down syndrome, but
Right.
sometimes, or it hurts me so deeply to see my daughter excluded. Let's
Yes.
put it that way.
Yeah.
Or, to be impacted by the ableism in our society. And so when I experienced that, then I could also better understand how someone who faces, let's say, homophobia or racism, I feel like it has impacted just my entire worldview. And not to say that I didn't see those injustices before, but I see things, I think, more fully now.
Yeah.
And so I think I used to see, I say it like this, that I used to kind of be sitting up on my high horse and say, oh, it's okay for someone else to have a daughter with Down syndrome.
Yeah.
That's fine.
The not in my
But
backyard thing.
not
Yeah.
me, right?
Yeah.
And then now I feel like I've got 2 feet on the ground and I'm standing looking at the people standing next to me,
Yeah.
right? And so that's a pretty incredible experience to have.
No, no, it
It's,
is. Hey, hyper empathetic person here, big fan of empathy, right?
yeah.
Um, and I think I feel also that when I've spoken on panels, about people being accidentally ableist and stuff, because it's easy to be accidentally ableist because we don't know everything, right? One thing I've said is I can always tell a person who's trying, who
Mm.
sincerely has the heart to want to learn, because none of us is going to be perfect in this sphere, right? Of allyship, of disability advocacy. We are definitely going to mess up, it could also be like terms and language will change, because I've even seen in the
Hmm.
last 8 years terms and language changing.
Hmm.
So I think when I see someone who is willing to learn and has a heart to want to empathize, that's a lot. So, in case you're ever tempted to feel like you're not doing well enough, you do come across as someone who actually has a heart to learn. So, I just wanted to give you that little bit of,
Thank you.
you know,
You're
um,
reminding me of a really beautiful quote, and it's called listening. It was from some saint back in the day. I want to say Saint Benedict, but I feel like I'm getting it wrong. It might have been Saint Augustine or something like that. But it
okay.
was this idea of listening with the ear of the heart.
Oh, I like that.
I love it very much. It was at a
Yeah.
session I attended at the World Down Syndrome Congress. One of the other, it was a really amazing physician who said that. And I thought that is at the core, I think, of how my worldview has changed by
Yeah.
having someone with Down syndrome in my life intimately. I've learned patience because
Mm,
there's big time challenges, and I would never want to shy away from that
yes,
because that's part of being human, right? We
for
all
sure.
have challenges and we all have things that we're good at. Um, but learning to listen with the ear of my heart.
I love that so hard. I'm going to look that up.
Yeah,
And I'll put it
do.
in the comments section where that comes from. um, so I've said a few times that I love like kind of the humanity, and that you don't portray yourself as this perfect, I am the most perfect advocate in the history of ever. In fact, your book isn't only about being a parent to a child with Down syndrome. You talk like there's also that other part, like other lies you've told yourself or other things that you've kind of learned. Um, Why did you choose to make this book go beyond just the story of Elise and you? Even though that's a super important story, why did you also choose to go beyond just that relationship?
Thank you for that question. So, Elise and I, our relationship, me confronting my own ableism, is at the heart of the book.
Yeah.
And I think every essay is colored by disability parenting, whether I explicitly talk about it or not, which I
Mm,
don't in many of the essays. And I think it was so important for me to represent people with Down syndrome. Like, there's more than just my daughter in the book who has Down syndrome. I
yes.
have another friend, Emily, who's my age, and we used to give talks together. And so she's also in the story at a few points. And I wanted them to be represented as whole as they are, right? The entirety of who they are,
Yeah.
not just some glorified positive version, or I don't know,
Yeah. No,
right?
no,
Or
for
this
sure.
idea of perfection. And so I wanted them to appear as whole as they are. And I also wanted to do that for myself
Mm,
as a mother to a child with Down syndrome, because there are stereotypes that if you are a special needs mom, in quotation marks, I don't love that term at all.
yeah. No,
But
yeet.
no, but that that's all that you are.
Yeah.
And so it was important to me to show that the self has multitudes, that I contain many identities, and
Yeah.
also to push back against the stereotype that, having a child with Down syndrome is an ill omen or a bad
Mm,
fortune, or these disability narratives that center around negativity, right?
yeah.
Around, I don't know where they come from, myth. Um,
Yeah.
but, well, I do know in part where they come from. It's because in the 50s and 60s and 70s, children with Down syndrome were regularly removed from their families and placed into institutions,
Yeah.
and institutions became places of gross violence and abuse and dehumanization. And
Hmm.
so when a group of people becomes dehumanized, then there's a lot of negativity around that. And some of most of the institutions are now closed, thankfully. But these attitudes persist,
Yeah.
right? And so I think it was important for me to speak to parents in that way, that my stories would relate to parents, and almost to say to them, you know, don't believe any of the lies
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
your life is somehow less because you have a child with a disability, or that their life is less. Don't believe any of that, right? There's
Yeah.
going to be hardships guess what? In any life, there's going to be hardships, right? But you can still have a big, beautiful life. Everybody can have that. Um,
Absolutely. I'm sorry, time is running out. I could talk to you for 5 episodes. Just to speak into that super quickly, I love that, because while you are, Lisa's mom, you are also you, Adelle. And I loved hearing even how you felt about nature, or how you wanted to get back into working and doing writing and doing being an educator and all that. Your relationship with your husband made me laugh in so many spots. I read the book, folks. You'll know what I mean. But I like that wholeness of you as well, right? That because sometimes people only choose to represent themselves with one hat on, and you wear a lot of hats in this. And I just have to very reluctantly close this up. So where can people find out everything about Adelle and all the cool things that you are and what you're writing and all that kind of funky stuff?
oh, thank you for that. So I'm on Instagram and Facebook, but if you visit www.adellepurdham.ca, my website, you'll be able to find me. Even to just plug in my name in a Google search, and there'll be great ways for us to connect.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Adelle, for appearing with us on the Disabled Crone.
Thank you so much for having me.
It was a pleasure. And stay tuned, folks, for episode 3. Thanks for watching and listening to the Disabled Crone. You can learn more about the Spoonie Authors Network by going to our website, spoonieauthorsnetwork.com. Follow us also on Blue Sky. And many thanks to Bruce Gordon for letting us use his tune as our theme for this podcast.